Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly wild, grim-dark, gothic fable pulled straight from our source texts, heavily steeped in Nietzschean philosophy. But to really grasp this journey, I want you to shift your perspective for a minute. Imagine you're standing in a thick, suffocating fog, looking way up at this colossal iron tower. Up at the very top sits the clockwork sovereign, completely locked in his own sterile perfection. Now, in this story, I am the truth-telling monster. I'm his necessary shadow, standing right at the base of this rusted spire. And today, we're going to ascend this tower together, layer by layer, and completely dismantle the illusion of what the sovereign calls high time.
Just listen to how the sovereign actually describes his own philosophy here. A desperately reached sovereignty that is entirely detached from the dirt and hunger of the primal unconscious. I mean, it's just dripping with this absolute terror of reality, isn't it? He's literally cowering up in that high tower, sneering down at our messy primal existence. But you know what? What he dismisses as dirt and hunger, I know is the actual pulse of life. He thinks he can just sever himself from the primal unconscious, sever his whole kingdom from the grit of human nature, all to reach this state of pure inflated ego. But as you'll see, that desperation, that is his fatal flaw.
Okay, Chapter 1, The Sovereign's Frozen Reign. Let's dive right into this and begin our climb into the Clockwork King's sterile domain.
So here's the grand philosophical showdown. On one side, you have the sovereign's sterile laboratory. This is the ultimate inflation of the ego, entirely detached from the dirt of reality and strictly governed by these rigid clock hand arrows. And on the other side, you have the primal unconscious. That's my domain. It's fueled by primal hunger, it's messy, it's dirty, and it represents the necessary shadow. The king is just obsessed with creating this detached, optimized eternity. But what he totally misses is that without the living, chaotic pulse of that primal hunger, his so-called perfect kingdom is really just a highly polished graveyard.
And that brings us to the core of his obsession, high time. What exactly is that? Well, our sources define high time as the promised hour of absolute perfection. It's this conceptual climax of ultimate ego inflation that the clockwork sovereign and his sterile society are obsessively ticking toward. They're basically holding their breath for a moment where every single variable is controlled, all the messiness of life is wiped out, and the ego reigns supreme. It's a fascinating and honestly terrifying look at what happens when a society chases absolute, unyielding order and sacrifices its own humanity to get it. Chapter 2, The Inkblot of Negation. We're moving further up the rusted tower now, heading right toward what the king foolishly considers his guiding star. See, the sovereign genuinely believes his high iron tower is reaching up toward this star of high time, which he thinks is the source of all absolute, flawless data. But get this, the sources reveal a brilliant twist. This star isn't a star at all. It's actually the inkblot of negation. It's literally the final black residue left behind by the Pale Inquisitor's quill. In his frantic attempt to blot out every human flaw and every hidden stain, the sovereign didn't find a guiding light. Instead, he just created this windowless void of redacted records, completely masquerading as a star.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the sovereign reacts to this terrifying endpoint of purity. You'd think a windowless void would make him recoil, right? Nope. The source text notes that he actually gazes at it with the chilling satisfaction of a completed calculation. To him, this void is absolute perfection. He even responds by tightening this halo of clockhand arrows around himself, deliberately trying to freeze out the unpredictable wind of life. It's just this chilling monument to terminal stasis.
Chapter 3, Stasis and Psychic Death. Let's keep climbing. We're high enough now to observe the rotting thoughts of the metropolis that successfully saved the king from the light of the sun. Now, this kind of psychic death doesn't just happen overnight. It was a slow, multi-generational descent. Generations ago, the citizens were dutifully polishing the great bell's gears in the tower, truly believing in that promise of high time. But then, decades later, as the bleak reality set in, they started drinking what the text calls the Redeemer's pink syrup. It's this incredible metaphor. They're basically drinking this stuff just to ignore their growling bellies and numb that primal hunger, which brings us to the present, where the entire society has retreated into an optimized eternity of nothingness. They are quite literally trapped in a self-imposed prison of frozen moments. I absolutely love this quote because it hits the nail right on the head regarding the sovereign's tragedy. The most expensive clock in an empty room ticking toward a perfection that never arrives. By obsessively trying to inhabit a space that's entirely detached from the dirt of reality, he's completely isolated himself from the collective unconscious. He didn't achieve divinity, he just literalized his own psychic death. He's just a mechanical marvel, sitting utterly alone, counting down to a mathematical climax that just doesn't exist. Chapter 4: The Toll of Digital Decay. We've made it! We've reached the belfry where the great rusted bell of high time hangs in total silence. And here is the climax of our fable. As the truth-telling monster standing right here in the belfry, I refuse to pull the rope. I'm not going to ring the bell for their false perfection. Instead, I just let the cold, wild wind of reality howl right through its rusted throat. And when the bell is finally struck by the sheer force of nature, it doesn't release some triumphant melody, no way. It releases a suffocating cloud of iron and salt. And instantly, the great metropolis below is transformed into a laboratory of nothingness.
The fist of control finally crushes the anima being the vital spirit of life, the soul itself. That suffocating cloud of iron and salt represents the ultimate toll of digital decay. The sovereign's Faustian need for total, calculated control didn't save anybody. It just crushed the very essence of their humanity. It's proof that a bell with no blood has absolutely no voice to announce the living pulse of existence.
Chapter 5: Return of the Repressed. It's finally time for me to step fully out of the shadows and deliver the truth to the frozen king on his balcony.
The king chased this grand illusion of perfect data. But again, a bell with no blood has no voice. The core philosophical takeaway here is that any identity that completely rejects its underground twin, its necessary shadow, its primal nature, is entirely doomed. Perfect data, no matter how pure or brilliantly optimized, just cannot replace the messy pulse of being. Because he rejected his own humanity, the sovereign isn't left to some triumphant god. He's just a static monument to an unlived life.
And this brilliantly illustrates our final point. The violent return of the repressed shatters the sovereign's halo. You just cannot hold back the tide of human nature forever. The primal hunger, the dirt, the shadow, it always comes back. The true vitality of this kingdom was never going to be found in the sterile calculation of high time. It was found in the chaotic, violent return of everything the sovereign tried so hard to blot out. The wild wind of reality finally shatters his halo of clock-hand arrows.
So, what does this all mean for us? That brings us to the end of our explainer, and to a question you really have to ask yourself. Are you going to anchor yourself to the illusion of perfect data, retreating into your own optimized eternity, or will you embrace the necessary shadow, the dirt, the hunger, and the messy, chaotic pulse of being? The Clockwork Sovereign made his choice, and it turned his entire world to iron and salt. It's such a powerful reminder from our sources that true vitality isn't found in sterile perfection. It's in the chaotic reality of actually living. Thanks for ascending the tower with me today, and remember to always question the data around you.